So today I want to talk about reflexivity. Reflexivity is a kind of politicized reflection that asks you to become aware of your own identity and how it shapes your knowledge and communication. And reflexivity is becoming more common in academic and political civic discourse. So, for example, I identify as a white Jewish woman, I identify as cisgender, queer, a US citizen, I identify as able bodied. All of these moments of reflexivity, all of these terms that define myself allow me to articulate how what I've experienced shapes what I know. Valuing reflexivity is rooted in a conception of knowledge that sees knowledge as created or socially constructed. So the idea is that facts don't objectively exist out there for us just to discover and record, but actually that as communities, we come together to agree on what is shared knowledge. So reflexivity is connected to ways of seeing and understanding the world that recognize that what we know is something that we've all determined together. Thus, reflexivity asks us to become more aware of our own communities and recognize how our community's epistemologies or understandings of knowledge has shaped us as researchers and as communicators. It also prompts us to recognize power relations between us and the communities we're studying. A brief history of reflexivity. So reflexivity in academia dates to the desegregation of academia in the 1960s and 1970s. In the 1950s, when PWIs were still all white and all male, of course, we have to remember that there were always minority serving institutions before then, but in white institutions of higher education, there was an assumption that white male experience and knowledge was universal. And so it was still normal for white male scholars to go do research and do science all over the world through an explicitly colonial lens. In the 1960s, student protests led by people of color, women of color, pushed for the desegregation of higher education. And that's a really rich and important history and is the reason that so many of us are in the institutions that we're in today. But those students, when they got into these colleges, they didn't just want to sit in the same classes as before. So they didn't just join the academy, they transformed the academy. They rejected courses and scholarship that looked at their own experiences through a colonial lens. But there wasn't scholarship at that time for them to draw on that validated their own experiences. They were paving a new path. And so women of color, Black women in particular, began speaking their own experiences into academic evidence and claiming community knowledge and community experience as valid for the project of academic knowledge production. In her book, Traces of a Stream, which studies Black women essayists in 19th and early 20th century America, rhetoric scholar and literacy scholar Jacqueline Jones Royster articulates an Afro-feminist ideology for research that prioritizes Black women's knowledge production. That chapter also includes a statement for researchers from outside the community doing research with or on Black women. So Royster writes, non-community scholars are called upon by their outsider status to demonstrate respect for the communities they study. They are obligated, by Afro-feminist ideologies anyway, to recognize overtly the ways in which their authority, as it may be drawn from dominant systems of power and privilege, intersects with the authority of others. They are obligated to hold themselves, rather than just their subjects, accountable for and responsive to disparities. So Royster speaks to an expansion of reflexivity. While reflexivity was pioneered by marginalized people, wrong metaphor. While reflexivity was initially used by marginalized people to validate their own experiences and knowledge, reflexivity is also increasingly being asked of people from dominant groups so that they can recognize how their experiences have shaped their knowledge and be accountable to the people that they're studying and studying with. So Royster says that those researchers from dominant groups are responsible for cultivating awareness of how our identities shape our research. And she says we must recognize overtly how dominant systems of power and privilege shape our research. So in academia today, reflexivity takes a wide variety of forms, from short reflexivity statements to entire research frameworks like autoethnography. Different disciplines and fields have different relationships to reflexivity. In some fields, especially the critical humanities and social sciences, it is almost expected, whereas in other fields like the hard sciences or engineering, it's more unusual. Even if you don't discuss your identity in any of your deliverables this quarter, today's activity still asks you to become more aware of your own identity. Articulating our own stories and how we've learned to view the world has value for ourselves as researchers, but also as citizens communicating across difference.